Can we exist without human rights? Absolutely no.
Awareness is critical, because if people don't know what their rights are, if they don't know what their basic human rights are, they can't even fight or demand those rights.
This season of the Unamplified podcast is sponsored by the GIZ African Union Aware Project. A project aims to strengthen women's representation and participation in political processes.
Imagine a society where there is no human rights, where the powerful make the rules and define the laws to protect only the powerful, and the vulnerable people in society are left without any protection. Imagine where we have no rule of law, where we have no fundamental human rights, where the least or the vulnerable, the majority of the people, are left without any kind of safeguard. What kind of society would that be? Welcome to another episode of the Unamplified podcast. My name is Cynthia Mbamalu, your host, and today with me I have my co-host.
Hi everyone, my name is Queen CY and welcome to the Unamplified podcast.
Yes, today we'll be discussing her rights, the smart way, because we believe that there is no other way than the human rights way. And we have two powerhouses, two powerful guests joining us today, one in the studio and one joining us all the way from the overseas. Queen CY, can you introduce our guest?
And we are honored to introduce Funke Adeoye. She is the founder of Hope Behind Bars and also Buki Shonibare. She is the founder and executive director of Invictus Africa. Welcome to the Unamplified podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Prince CY and Cynthia.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for having me too.
Yes. So today we'll be discussing her rights the smart way. And I have a general question to everyone. Who are we or what are we without our human rights? Like, can we exist without human rights? And when you respond to that, I would like to also get your perspective, your views around the status of women's rights in Nigeria and in the countries in Africa that you also have a sense of. So I can begin with you, Funke, and then I'll get Buki. Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Cynthia. And thank you once again for having me. So the first question is, can we exist without human rights?
Yes.
I think the answer to that question is right in the question, because it says, can we exist without human rights? We are human beings. And that's why we have human rights.
Yes.
And so there is no human being without human rights. When you look at human rights, what is human rights, or what are human rights? Human rights are those entitlements or freedoms that people have just for the sake of the fact that they are humans. They are universal in the sense that irrespective of the country, nationality, everyone has such rights. They are inalienable, meaning that no government in the world can take away that right from whoever owns it. They are also protected by the law. So when you look at human rights, they are usually enshrined in a particular constitution or a body of law protecting people. So irrespective of your race, your sexuality, your gender, you own human rights, and we cannot exist without human rights. So the first thing to say is that women's rights are human rights.
True.
It's important that we put that out there. The status of women's rights in Nigeria and I think Africa is one that calls for a lot of action. Because I mean, we've come far from, what existed many years ago, first with the League of Nations, the United Nations, and then eventually we had the CEDAW, which is the international treaty that provides for the body of rights of women across the world. But when you look at what is obtainable in many countries in the world, including Nigeria, you find that we are in a very far place between policy and practice. I mean, Nigeria has made some strides. Buki is the women's rights expert. I'm the criminal justice person, but I'm sure Buki would share more light on what has happened in terms of policy. But recently there's been lots of policies around women's rights. But the fact is we have a long way to go between policy and implementation. And I think as we continue the conversation, we'll share some examples of areas in which we know that we haven't really started at all. There's a long way to go.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, when you talked about the fact that you're human, that's why you have human rights, and the gap between policy and implementation. Buki, I mean, this is your top, and you're one of the voices that in Nigeria, you cannot talk about human rights advocacy, the rights of a girl child, without mentioning Buki Shonibare.
Yeah.
What do you think? Can we exist without human rights? What are we without our rights? And what's the status of women's rights in Nigeria?
Can we exist without human rights? Absolutely no. And I like the way Funke framed it along the lines of the fact that we are human beings, human beings, should have rights, in any given society. So can we exist without rights? No. And why is that? Is because if we run a society where we don't have human rights that separate, what human beings are supposed to enjoy, then we're looking at a society where power can be used anyhow by anybody. What that means is that authority then becomes completely unchecked, and when we run a society where people don't have human rights, those who are hugely affected the most are usually those who are completely underserved, those who are in marginalized communities. So even when we talk about human rights violations, look at the story in Nigeria and let's see, whether it has affected the high and mighty. It's usually those people that we usually say are the lower cadre. So what human rights does is also to help us have equality within any particular society, whether they are codified or whether they are such rights that have not been written anywhere, and they exist in one way or the other. And then with human rights as well, we all know that in our human rights are embedded in chapter 2 and chapter 4 of our constitution. Chapter 2 looks at the socioeconomic rights, the right to education, section 18, right to health, and all of those socioeconomic rights. But when you look at chapter 4, you look at, civil and political rights as well, right to life, fair hearing, and all of that. And so just imagine if we don't have those rights that exist in Nigeria, are we going to be existing as human beings? No. But permit me to also intersect that with women. When there has been, violation of human rights generally, women are usually those who are heavily affected. Whether it is, for instance, right to life, we've seen how gender-based violence has affected women so much that it has costed them their lives in so many ways. But when we look at those principles that guide human rights, and Funke rightly mentioned it when she talked about, what was said during the Beijing Declaration, that women's rights are human rights. And what that means is that in any given society, principles of human rights must guide the principles that helps us to rule or to lead over women. The principles of participation, where we want to make sure that women, and I'll close my thought by saying this, that principles of participation, of accountability, non-discrimination, transparency, human dignity, empowerment, rule of law. If you look at those 7 prompt principles, when we apply them to women, then we can begin to see in Nigeria. And I think that also answers the second limb of your question. What's the current state? I will just use participation as an example. We only have 4 women in the Senate. Can we say women are participating? Can we say the principle of participation is being achieved, when we have just 4 women, or just, 50 women out of 990 state houses of assembly members, or just 15 or 14 women actually out of 360 House of Reps members? Can we say we are achieving participation? And we can do that and break it down across those 7 principles that we have talked about, and that will answer the state of women's rights in Nigeria, that we are not yet there. We are just, gradually moving.
Yeah, wow, Quincy, why? Before I reflect on this, what do you think?
Well,
can we exist without human?
We can. I don't think we can exist without human rights, because even animals have rights.
Yes.
And if we are just here, we're just existing as humans, on the shadow of our potential, we are not existing as human beings, because I don't even think there should be human without human rights.
Yes.
Because without human rights, we are faced with injustice. We are vulnerable when we are faced with oppressions, and we cannot exercise our full potentials. So I don't think we can exist without human rights.
Yes. When I was listening to Funke and then Buki, and then just listening to you, I think a lot of times there's a bigger question on, do citizens even know that they have rights? Especially in a situation where there's high levels of poverty and unemployment. It's almost like a lot of times we're pushed to a beggarly status as a people, where we begin to beg for what ordinarily we ought to demand for. There's one between I'm begging you for this and I demand this because I have a right to this. And then there's also the conversation around, most time we focus on the civil and political rights, because I love when Buki also highlighted that we have the socioeconomic rights. And those rights are important for us to exercise the civic and political right that we also advance. And at the end of it is the consciousness that we need to all come to as a people, that, hey, I'm human. And because I'm human, like you said, these are inalienable. They are inherent rights. They belong to me as a person. But then as women, also to say that women's rights are human rights. And you can't talk about participation if the majority of those in office is men, if it's male dominated, if you have less than 3% or barely 3% representation, then can you say this women's rights? So when you were just talking, I was just thinking, do the average citizen even know they have rights? Can they boldly say, this is my human right, I know my rights? And when there's an issue with those in power, they will stand up and say, no, I have a right. You're not doing me a favor. I have a right. And I think that's also the bigger question. The awareness around the presence of these rights as humans. And Quincy, I think you had
My question is to you.
Okay.
You work in Hope Behind Bars Center around addressing human rights violations and injustice. Does the justice system in Nigeria affect women differently? And how does that affect their leadership opportunities?
Wow. Okay. That's an interesting question. So does the justice system in Nigeria affect women differently? I would say yes. The justice system affects women differently, I think, across the world, because first, when you look at the justice system, and I work in the criminal justice space. So we're talking law enforcement, police, judiciary, and corrections. The history of our justice system is a patriarchal system. When you look at from the personnel to even the laws that are present, the laws are criminal justice laws. And then you look at women as we are biologically, I mean, we have differences. So when the policies in place do not in any way provide or support the peculiarities of women, I would say that they definitely affect women differently. And I'm going to give you an example. So I work within the correctional system a lot, and the Correctional Service Act of 2019 states that we should have one correctional facility in every state of the Federation. But as I speak to you, there are only 3 facilities that are meant for women. Now, what that means is that Nigerian correctional facilities we have 256 custodial centers. It's called custodial centers now, no longer prison. Just 3 of those 256 facilities are for women. Now, what that means is that they have their challenges in terms of their resources and all of that. But even with the resources, women just get very little. So we want to carry out an intervention in a prison, for instance, and we need to engage with both the male and the female. Most of the facilities that are around, Nigeria are housed within the male facility.
Okay.
Yeah. So we just have a female correctional facility in Lagos, in Adamawa, and I think in one of the states in the south. So you want to have an intervention. You can't, the women and the men are not allowed to work, to be together. So most times the women are marginalized. You want to, carry out, empowerment interventions, vocational skills and all of that. They don't have access to that. Or is it the policing part? I mean, recently, I think not very recently, but in 2016, we had the issue of the raid of sex workers. And we found that, policemen are actually picking up sex workers, and what are they doing? They are sleeping with them. They are raping them with pure water nylons. Buki would remember because I remember there was a march around that. Yeah. Now that is a very good example of how the system is actually disproportionately unfavorable to women, right? Because when you look at statistics generally, we have less women in the force. We have less women. I think if we go to judiciary, that's another conversation entirely. So people who have to adjudicate on matters relating to women. They don't even understand the peculiarities of women. Talk more of the correctional facility. And then when we go into the conversation around leadership as well, because we have less women in political positions, they are not, as Buki had mentioned, they are not able to make the right policies that would empower women who engage with the criminal justice system. So that's another very, very major thing. Then final thing I wanted to say on this, Buki mentioned something I thought was very critical when she was talking about human rights. That human rights violations majorly affects people that are marginalized, vulnerable populations and all of that. And when you look at the number of women in parliament, like she rightly mentioned, we're already marginalized.
Yes.
Yeah, so that means the system, the fact that we don't have many women in leadership or many women participating, it's marginal. It gives us a second layer of marginalization.
Wow, that's going to say the second layer of marginalization. Number one, you're not even there, and then it means when the decisions are taken, when the laws are made, it's not made through a gender lens or gender sensitive lens, which is why it also becomes, because when I didn't even know the number that we have only 3 correctional service or custodial. It's the
custodial centers. Prison.
We don't call it prison anymore. And we don't. Yes, it's not correctional custodial centers. I need to be learning these new terms, but I actually appreciate that idea because the whole idea of incarceration is that there's some level of rehabilitation and there's a plan for reintegration. But the fact that we have about 256
and only 3 is predominantly for women.
That in itself is problematic. I can imagine that there could also be more challenges of overcrowding and lack of access to things in these 3 that we have. And so you can imagine the challenge. But imagine if you had a National Assembly that you had more women in there, and you had those committees on human rights that are, and the committees that oversight Interior, Ministry of Interior, for instance. Those are some of the conversations I would have had happening long time ago, even before now. And so I want to bring in Buki, because you're working in Victor's Africa. You do a lot around a right-based approach to advocacy, a lot around data. And I know you're investing in doing a data bank, I'll call it, or a data hub when it comes to gender advocacy, when it comes to things around assessing legislation that to ensure that they are either enforced or that they meet the gender sensitive principles. From your work, from your experience so far, do you think we have sufficient legislation to enable women political representation in Nigeria? That's one. And the second part, if you do not think so, what needs to be done?
Thank you so much, Cynthia. The straight answer to that question is no. We don't have sufficient legislation. And permit me to take us back to March 1, 2022. That was the day the 5 gender bills were thrown out. For lack of a better way of putting it, the annoying thing about the 5 gender bills is that those bills are bills that guarantee basic women's rights. Basic. There was the bill that has to do with reserved seats, which we are now pushing for separately. Basically saying that amend key provisions of the Constitution to make sure that there is designated or reserved or special seats for women. People have argued on the basis of the fact that the reserved seat is tokenistic. It will increase, cost of governance. It will mean that we are unfavorably. We are being much more favorable to women than men. What happens to men and all of those things. But when you introduce a bill like a reserved seats bill, is a temporary special measure, which is usually introduced because you need to close existing unequal gaps, right? And it's not just for women. Sometimes it is used for young people. Sometimes it is used for persons with disabilities. And you introduce that measure such that when that inequality has been closed, then you can remove that measure. For the reserved seat, for instance, even in the 2022 bill, it was supposed to run for just 4 election cycles, such that after that, you can then remove that measure. Hoping that at that time we would have achieved some level of equality, that bill was thrown out. Don't forget also that there was also the bill on citizenship, basically saying that amend, I think, section I think that was section 20 or 26 of the Constitution that says that a woman can transfer citizenship to her husband, the same way the Constitution currently guarantees that a man can transfer his citizenship to his foreign wife. Don't forget also, there was also affirmative action in it. There was also the ministerial and commissioner nomination, and there was the one on indigenship. Those were the 5 key provisions. Now, imagine that we didn't have all of these bills or all of these provisions in the Constitution, and we still do not have them. Those are basic, so we don't even have it. Now, each time we talk about legislation or we talk about equality, people in the House or people in the National Assembly will always throw at us Section 42 of the Constitution. Section 42 of the Constitution is that provision that guarantees equality, right? But if you interpret it, you will notice that it does not establish, for instance, things like affirmative action. And why do we keep pushing for that? It is to say that until a nation constitutionalizes affirmative action, then we are still playing. Every country that has done well in terms of women's representation, whether Rwanda, South Africa, Namibia, they constitutionalized it. I mean, a lot of us here are lawyers, or some of us as law graduates. We understand how constitution is the ground norm. And for listeners well, when we say ground norm, we mean it's the apex law. If you want to show us how serious you are as a nation, put in your apex law the fact that women should actually enjoy equal participation. So long as we don't have that, then we still don't have that constitutional provision that guarantees women's equal participation and representation. And Cynthia, don't forget, we've had this conversation a number of times. The fact that let's not be swayed by the fact that we see a lot of women wear ashwebi and all those patterned, ankaras during election. That's not women's representation. Women are participating actively in politics. Women are doing a lot. Women are coming out to vote. They are participating. But when we look at the representation, that's where we have a lot of problems. Let me also remind us of Section 17, subsection 2 of the Constitution. That's the provision of the Constitution that really talks about, what's it called, that every citizen shall have equality of rights, and then there was the obligation around the fact that, the evolution and sort of like a promotion of family life and all of that. But when you look at that particular provision, it still doesn't give the state, and by state I mean Nigeria, that particular commitment to equality. Go to the federal character provision in the Constitution, Section 14, subsection 3. And if you look at that again, you will see that while sex was used, gender was not used. And so if in the Constitution we have these key gaps, what needs to be done is that we need to amend all of those provisions. So let me wrap up my thoughts on this by saying that first, we have insufficient legislation in Nigeria. It looks like we have laws, but they are completely insufficient. Even the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, which we recently released the report on, that act was initially introduced as a Violence Against Women Prohibition Bill. But of course, rightfully so, it was said that it's not only women that are experiencing violence, that is both men and women, and so it was turned to be a violence against persons. But we know that a lot of the provisions there relate to violence that affect women. Even at that, majority of states, 23 states that have passed the VAP Act, are not even using it in the courts. When we ask some of those people, just as some of this, we can't put it in a report. When we ask some of those MDAs in the state that we engage, they said that a lot of the judges don't know the provisions of the VAP.
Wow.
And so lawyers are careful to use it to argue their cases because they just don't know the key. So they resort to the Criminal Code Act and the Penal Code Act. The same Penal Code Act that has provision that permits a man to beat his wife. Is the same one that we are using to legislate. So first, there is insufficient. And don't forget, we've had battle upon battle to ensure that Nigeria domesticates the CEDAW through the Gender and Equal Opportunities Bill. We are still fighting on it. There are also gaps in existing legislation. The Electoral Act, and Cynthia, I believe that you can speak more to this. The Electoral Act itself, have key gaps in it that doesn't really guarantee women's representation. What needs to be done is the fact that if we really are a nation that consider half of our population serious, then we should first of all constitutionalize women's active representation in politics. I usually love to use Namibia as an example, what they did. The SWAPO party, they made sure, for instance, that from the party policy level, that women's equal representation. So if a man is the head of a particular position, a woman must be the deputy. So first, we need to amend the constitution. Let's revisit the 5 gender bills. Sure. Make sure that we pass it. Those are basic to show that we are serious. Second, let's pass existing laws that guarantees women's rights and women's equality. I.e., one that is currently out on the table now is the reserve seat bill or the special seat bill. If we are serious, let's pass that particular one. And lastly, let's look at the existing legislations and make sure that we bring them in alignment with the provisions, the values, and the principles of the Constitution. Section 1, subsection 3 of the Constitution is the one that we use for consistency to say that if any law, any legislation has provisions that are inconsistent with the principles or the provisions of the Constitution, then that law, that legislation is to the extent of its inconsistency null and void. So long as we still have a penal code that has such kind of provision, then we are not yet ready. Let's remove all of those repugnant provisions in those kind of, and I'm just using the penal code as an example. There are so many other ones. Let's remove them and bring them in alignment with the principles that guide equality, justice, fairness in any democratic society.
Fantastic way to put it, honestly, because, just listening to both of you, I'm feeling too inspired. I feel like now I should hit the streets because there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. Yes, Quincy.
I like that part where you say that it looks as if we have a legislation, but we don't actually have it. And when you say that there's a gap, a gap between the legislation and women inclusiveness in political system. Now, I have a question, boys, for both of you. Okay. Is there a gap in our criminal justice system that allows any form of violence against women that can limit their roles in politics?
We use the Panther principle in our organization. That's to guarantee, to sort of like shape our human rights approach to our work. Those are the 7 principles that I mentioned earlier. Let me rehash it, permit me. Panther, P-A-N-T-H-E-R, participation, accountability, non-discrimination, transparency, human dignity, empowerment, and rule of law. So coming back to that question, I usually try to answer this question based on, those 7 core principles. But permit me to say, and I mean, across all of this, we can spend a whole day just talking about each of those 7 principles. But let me talk about one that has been a burden for me recently. If you look at the provision of the VAP, for instance, which hugely favors women or should hugely favor women, the question is how many people know about it? If you look at the VAP provides that the people have a right to know the provision of the VAP. What it is simply saying indirectly is that if people don't know the provision of this VAP, they will not be able to use it. Yes. And if that gap exists between law and reality, then law becomes just paper. We and the entire people who are in the supply side must make sure that we don't just have laws, but that those laws are known. They are known sufficiently so that people can use it. I think that is one major gap. And I'm saying that as a gap because most laws do not include in its provision the right to know, such that it mandates those who have been given the power, given the implementation status of that particular law, it mandates them to, promote the provision of it so that people can know and use it. One last one that has always been plaguing me is the proof beyond reasonable doubt as it relates to criminal law. A lot of women, the conviction rate of sexual violence cases today in Nigeria is less than 10%. And guys, it's not peculiar to just Nigeria. Even in the UK, it's still less than 10%. But let's not compare ourselves with, let's look at our own issue. The proof beyond reasonable doubt for sexual violence, for instance, as with any other crime, you must, prove the actus reus, that's the action itself, and you must prove the mens rea, that's the intention itself. That burden of proof is on the victim. That's an anomaly. We can't run a society where somebody who has been abused is still given that burden to come and prove. Someone who is, completely traumatized, I think in our criminal justice, and I'm only answering one part. I know there are 10 and 100 parts of it, so I'm pushing it to Funke. But I'm answering this one because this is the one that has really been plaguing me. The fact that we must shift that burden. We must shift the burden in such a way that, yes, we want he who assaults should come and prove. But he who rapes should also come and prove that he or she did not rape. Otherwise, we are placing undue burden, on the person who has actually, been abused. I think that if we look at those 7 core principles and we look at the provisions of law, whether our ground norm or the legislation, then we still have a lot of gap. And I think one last gap that I want to mention are those gaps where the law permits violation of women's rights. I've used penal code as an example, that allows a man to beat his wife so long as he is correcting. That same provision has been used to violate the constitutional right of women to life, of physical liberty of movement, and so many others. So until we achieve that alignment, then we'll continue to have laws that guarantees violation of women's rights.
Yeah, Funke.
Yeah, no, I think Buki has started on a very great note, because I was going to start with the fact that we still have those outdated criminal legislation. So she's repeatedly talked about Section 55, 1 of the Penal Code that allows a man to correct his wife as long as there's no grievous bodily harm. And we have actually experienced cases where we have represented women, and it's on that basis. We represented women who have suffered such abuse. I once represented a young girl, a child bride actually, who we met her in prison when she was 15.
15 in prison?
In prison, yes. She had gotten married at 13.
They married her off?
Yeah, they married her off. So she spent 3 years married, and she was alleged to have killed her stepdaughter. And I remember when I took up the case, just visibly looking at this child, she's a child. She had been in prison for about 3 years when we met her. And I remember in the course of representing her, this was like in her early days, about 2018, 2019. I thought to raise something to the judge, one of those trial dates. We had just concluded the bail hearing. And I just said, okay, my lord, I think I need to bring something to your attention. And that's the fact that the person before us is someone that has been failed by the system. She has no business, being in prison. She should be in school, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't time for the final, submission, but I just wanted to put that out. And I remember getting the shock of my life when this high court judge looked at me and said, counsel, you do know that as long as she's married, she's an adult.
Because of the constitution,
the constitution, the ground norm that Buki talked about actually permits that. And this was not even somewhere in maybe the far north. This was just beside us, Nasarawa State.
Whoa.
Yeah, and we had lawyers in court. Everybody was laughing. They're like, look at her, she has breasts, she's an adult. I was shocked. I was flabbergasted. Eventually we were able to get her out, but that's just one example of how even our constitution, our ground norm, is, we have provisions in there that perpetrate violence against women. Do we want to go to even other laws like the Sharia law. You know, in some parts of the North, a woman commits adultery, she's stoned, and the man goes scot-free. So it's everywhere. When you look at our criminal legislation, you find that these laws have been around for years on end, and the people that even gave us these laws, they've amended their criminal justice legislation over and over again, and then we still have those laws. So it's important that, you know, we sit down and actually review our laws. Our laws call for serious review, and then review them using a gender lens. So there's the part about the laws. Then there's also the part about the personnel that I mentioned earlier. The fact that Nigeria as a country, we have these social, cultural norms that is part of us. And somehow you find that still embedded in the way criminal justice is still done. So a young child or someone who's passing on the street gets picked up and a man picks the person up. We once had another client who was incarcerated. No, she was in police custody for 2 nights. And the 2 nights she spent in police custody, there was no woman on duty. It was a man on duty. This was a 17-year-old child. We did some campaign around her last year when she was picked up. So we have the fact that even criminal justice personnel, we have more men, you know, from the police, law enforcement to even the prisons and all of that. We have more men there. And then also because a lot of them, I mean, they will tell you that there is no resource for training. So they don't even go through gender specific training. Yeah. So they don't even understand some of the things we are talking about. You try to have conversations with them and they tell you that, hey, you are trying to change the order of things. This is not America and all of that. I think a whole lot of this conversation, to be honest, is really rooted in first the lack of awareness of what it means to address these issues using a gender lens, the importance of women's rights. We've not really come to that point in a country where we prioritize women's rights, because if we do, we would not be operating the kind of systems that we have, especially from, you know, the different arms of government to even our justice system as well. Wow.
You know, just listening, and it just calls to question the role of, now, ordinarily, we ought to have a juvenile criminal justice system.
Oh, that's that's another conversation on its own.
Because you talked about a 17-year-old picked up and locked up for 2 days before your intervention. 17 is not the age of criminal liability, because 18 is ordinarily. But I mean, the case of the girl, you know, there was some years ago, we had this big campaign, Child Not Bride. Yeah. And one of the proposal was to amend that section in the Constitution. I'm trying to remember the particular section. Yeah. But I remember the line basically. What it says basically is, for the full age of maturity is 18, but a woman who is married is deemed to be of full age.
Full age, yeah.
So what this means is, it looks like your full age is determined by your marital status. So what these people do is, they marry of 12-year-old, 13-year-old, and then they say, because you're married, you're deemed, you're now of full age. And that in itself is discriminatory. Yeah. Which is why the fight against child marriage is still a battle we're not winning. Yeah. Because, I mean, the 13 years old, you can imagine 13 years spent 2 years already incarcerated. Yeah,
3 years.
3 years incarcerated, awaiting trial. Yeah. This is a childhood lost. Yeah. The period she was in a marriage. Yeah. Yes, please, Bookie. Yeah.
I think, you know, I had to open the Constitution so that we can read it, so viewers know that we are not being sentimental here. You know, that's section 29, subsection 4B.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Now, let's not forget that section 29 is the provision of the Constitution on renunciation of citizenship. Right. The subsection 4B is now the part where it says, subsection 4 says, for the purposes of subsection 1 of this section, that's the part on renunciation. It says full age means the age of 18 years and above, right? That's subsection 4A, right? The subsection 4B now says, any woman who is married shall be deemed to be of full age. Can you see the contradiction? Yeah. First, subsection A has said that full age means that the age of 18 years of age. The drafters of this provision, why didn't they leave it at just subsection A?
Thank you.
Why did they have to include subsection B? Because subsection B now says that, well, even though full age means 18, But if you are married, even if you are married at 2 years old or 17 years old or 12 years old, you are considered not that subsection A does not apply to you. So marriage is now an offense. To say that so long as you are married, we no longer consider you to have human dignity. You anything. Do you guys get the problem that we are having?
Yes.
Why wasn't it left at just subsection 4A? Why did we have to introduce subsection 4B? I believe that if Nigeria really wants to show that it is serious, expunge subsection 4B, because it is completely useless, and it is being used by people, including legislators who marry young children. It has been that, after all, it is in the Constitution. Guys, let's not lie to ourselves. Those people that were asking to amend this provision, they're also marrying underage girls.
Yes.
Which is
And
where the
if we are
problem.
serious, we must get them to remove this provision, because this provision alone has been used a lot of time to marry underage girls. And let's not think that marriage, because those people who perpetrate this believe that they are doing the girl and their family a favor. No, you are killing the girl, because the system is not yet fully built for the kind of sex that is coming from a big tummy, big man on a small girl, and then to impregnate a womb is not yet mature enough. And then there is fistula, there is all of those things. What the Constitution is saying is that it is violating its own right to life. Because with this provision, the chapter 4 right that guarantees right to life, this provision contradicts it. So section 1, subsection 3 of the Constitution should first of all be applied in itself to make sure that there is consistency in the provision of the Constitution.
I totally agree with Buki, to be honest, because I know this child, I have to call her a child. When we met her, she still had she was raped a lot of times by her husband, who was 3 times older than her. But and she was always flogged. So we still saw the cane marks on her body, because according to her, she would always run away, and then they'll get her back and then they'll flog her. So different layers of violence that she actually faced. She had a child, but she lost the child. Yes. So that was why when her
she had a child at probably 13 or 14.
And then he lost the child, and then, it's just layers and layers of violence. And then, like she said, to have people who are supposed to be learned, legislators, or even a high court judge saying or alluding to the fact that, that's what the Constitution says, so it has to be, it's a big problem.
No. Some years ago, we had this big campaign. Unfortunately, not good. And this was when one of the senators, was it Senator Yerima, that was his name or so, had married this young girl, this teenager. And it started this whole campaign, child not bride. For some reason, we could not amend that section, because you will not hear this man arguing and saying, some girls develop earlier, 13, they are this. And I'm like, these are kids. How are you comfortable as a man in your 40s, your 50s, in your 60s to sleep with a child that is under 18 at 12 and 13? How are you not the devil? Do you understand? But, let me not even start my rant, because we need to, this is one of the things. Yes. If we can't get this section out, this subsection out, it will make even the efforts we've achieved with the VAP, the efforts we've achieved in pushing for some gender policies at the state level. Some governors have passed some gender policies. We are losing all of those gains, because at the end, if a judge can tell you, even the judge cannot even think and say, this is a child, can tell you that, the Constitution deems her adult, it shows that there's a bigger problem with our system. And this question is actually for you, Funke, because I know you've done a lot of work in the human rights defense space. Are there untold stories of women resilience and female leadership in the human rights defense space? And then, why do you think we need the human rights defenders legislation?
Thank you. Are there untold stories? Definitely. In Nigeria, working as a human rights defender in Nigeria, it's I just say dangerous. And then when you're a woman human rights defender, you again face different layers of injustice and oppression. I would like to start with the story of one of our clients. She was in the news last year. Her name is Angel. She was in the news for participating in the End Bad Governance protest. She was the only woman that was arrested out of 119 persons in FCT. And her story, she had gone for the protest the first day, the second day. On the third day, in the night at 2 a.m., according to her, she had this bang on her door, and armed men came into her room. She was naked. Their faces were covered. They had guns, and of course she thought they were kidnappers. They didn't give her breathing space. They told her she had to follow them. She thought that was the end of everything. Cut the long story short, they dragged her from her house, and then she found out that it was the NSA, the DSS that had picked her up. Yes. She spent 92 days in incarceration. But why do I? Yes, 92 days. One of the women that, one of the cases that we had handled, Buki is in the coalition group where we had tried to raise money for their bill. She was the only woman. Why do I highlight her story? The energy with which she spoke and how she said, you know what? I've always been an activist all my life. I have only one son. I told my son that I'm ready to die as long as I help people to see that they need to stand up and use their voices. She said, when I went to prison and I came out, I became stronger. If they could not kill me in prison, they can't kill me again.
Wow.
I highlight her case because she's not, you might just know her as somebody. She was News Central took a video of her talking about bad governance protests, and that was how they picked her face and picked her up. So she might not be in the limelight like some of us, but to find such resilience. And yes, I have 2 kids, and I've not been picked up yet. I don't know if they pick me up. I'm not sure I can look at my kids in the eyes and say, oh, if I die, I die. But this woman said yesterday, even with media and everything, if I perish, I perish, because I have spent 90 days in prison and I've seen the worst of things. And trust me, there are so many other women like that. Untold stories, women that are not out there, they are not in the limelight, but they are fighting, they understand the struggle, and they are willing to lay down their lives for the work that we do. And we can only continue to do the work that we do. Every one of us. For most of us, we are lucky to find ourselves in fancy offices, and, we engage legislators. There are different arms to this work. But for those women on the grassroots, yes, that are able to mobilize, we need to put out their stories, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to share her story. I'm going to definitely share this podcast with her. Yeah. Yes. So I think that's one story that I would like to share. And maybe the other one, would be my story. Because when we talk about human rights defenders, most times, again, you think that you need to have my understanding of human rights defenders before I came into my work is you need to have a background of activism, and, you need to be on the streets. I did not have a background of activism, right? I just knew that there was work to be done, and I had been trained as a lawyer. This is what I want to do. So just to put it out there for the viewers, for everyone watching and everyone listening, that you can find your place. Yeah. Some people can be the data bank or data hub like Buki. Some people can be like the constitutional law experts like Cynthia. And you could just be that person who wants to use your profession. It doesn't have to be law. It could be psychology. It could be anything. And understanding your role in human rights, and then as a woman, understanding that this struggle is for every one of us, you can present that particular thing that you have and then use it to push for the struggle. Thank you.
Wow. And the human rights defenders legislation.
Oh, the human rights. That is very, very important. We just shared a lot of points around how even our ground normal constitution has a lot of gaps. And then the human rights defenders legislation basically is to protect human rights defenders who are on the field, who are working to protect human rights, basically. And to say that the human rights defenders bill is not just for mainstream human rights defenders like us. It's actually for everybody, because it provides an extra layer of protection to people who are at the front lines. And to say that it's important we don't restrict human rights defenders to the activists and the advocates or people like us, but it goes beyond even those who are, national road transport workers, Market Women Association. Yeah, all those people who protect. Exactly. So it's important that we all come together and first of all understand the place of these rights and then ask that the bill be actually enacted. Yeah,
because even someone like, is it Peace you call
that? Angel.
And someone like Angel, for instance, that's what they call people who go out to protest. Because you don't protest because it's a fashion.
Yes.
It's fashionable. Yes. You protest because you want to defend the right to dignity, the right to better livelihood, And I think, because I remember when you mentioned, I said, this is what we need to create awareness around, actually, because at the end, we will all be protected by the law. And this will be like our closing question. And I have a general question to everyone. I'll begin with Buki and Funke, and then we'll come to Queen Siwa in the studio. what do we need to do to enable an environment that promotes gender sensitive or gender responsive legislation? What do we need, and what do we need to do that to achieve that? And I think the other question for me would be, we all agree that her right is a smart way, women's right is a smart way to proceed. What will be your call to action? You know, when it comes to strengthening our systems to enable better protection of women's rights and the rights of the girl child?
Before I answer the question, one quick comment on what Funke said, and even before I said that, is to really, really celebrate Funke and the work that you do. I mean,
Yes.
take your flowers, Funke.
Thank you.
Like,
Yeah,
well
you
done.
deserve it, honestly.
Thank you so much.
And it's important that we celebrate women like Funke, because the work we are, is data we're doing, is numbers. We do correlation, we do all those big English and all of that. But it takes a lot to go on the field. It takes a lot to also defend these people and receive all of these stories and how it sometimes even affects your own mental health. You know, so this is me, and I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone to say well done to you and for the amazing work that you do. And one last comment on that is that I think when we keep saying human rights defenders, people just think it's a particular group of people, and that's the point that Funke is making, that maybe they are human rights lawyers, human rights people. Everybody is a human rights defender. Because the question is, who is a human rights defender? Guys, if you are listening, it means that one who defends the rights of human beings. That's what it means. So if you see a child that did not go to school and you took a video of it to say, why are you not going to school? You are a human rights defender. If your gate man's child did not go to school and you say, why didn't you go to school? I will pay, even if you are not taking a video of it and you say, I'm going to send you to school. That's a human rights defender. If you go to a hospital and you realize that somebody who is pregnant is not receiving the right kind of health care, and you come online or you talk about it or you do something about it, you are actually defending somebody's human rights. And when we talk about this right to life, liberty, movement, so long as you are raising your voice, so long as you are taking an action, you are a human rights defender. You don't need to be a lawyer. You don't need to be a human rights lawyer. And everybody is a human rights defender, because we are human beings, we have rights, and what you are doing in your own way, your own voice, your own spaces, you are defending it. That makes you a human rights defender. So don't run away from it. People are empowered only to the extent to which they know. We need to empower people with knowledge.
True.
The best way to keep people under is to remove knowledge completely. When people don't know that they have rights, you have kept them in the dark. And let's not forget that in the word empowered is the word power. Is the word power. As in word, yes. Hey, I'm gingering. You know, as in people have power to the extent to which they know. Guys, remember when we were in school, they will always say knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. So all of these laws that we talk about, VAP, Constitution, Human Rights Defenders Bill, don't even wait for it to be an act. Start talking about it. Reserve seat bill, people will engage on it. People will claim their rights. People will use it when they know. And it is not just enough that they know that there is a constitution. It's not just enough that they know that there is a VAP. Or it's not just enough that they know that there is an electoral act. They need to know the content of it. I was telling Cynthia when she was in our office a few days ago that in the VAP Act implementation report that we did recently, 50.7% Nigerians do not know about the VAP. You remember how we talk about the VAP? The whole advocacy around it. 50.7% Nigerians do not know about the VAP.
More than half.
That's more than half. And out of that, 29.3 is the only percentage that they said they know the content of it. And guess what? That 29.3 are people in NGO sector and civil servants.
Wow.
And even when we did a correlational analysis, we realized that most people who know about the law are those who are graduates, who have postgraduate education, who are living in urban areas. We have one huge duty, and that would be my call to action. Laws must just not end up in papers. We must take it to villages, to everyone. You know, I said at the beginning that when there's human rights violation, is those that are underserved, that are hugely affected. We must take the law to them, speak it in their language. Whether it is Yoruba, Ibibio, Hausa, any language that they understand, explain to them. Shebi, you know, say for inside constitution, if somebody beat you, if you carry the person go court, if you carry the person go court, the person go spend life for prison. And then you begin to sensitize people in the language and in the spaces, you know, where they will learn better. So my own key thing that needs to be done for existing laws, I believe that if we implement the existing laws to the best extent possible, we will solve half of our problem. And then from there, we can keep strengthening the laws. But so long as people don't know, people will not claim their right. And if people don't claim their right, the law is as useless as a paper.
Wow. Thank you. This your one word was a thesis. Okay.
I mean,
but thank you.
There are a lot of things that we can recommend, but it still boils down to what Buki had said. Awareness is critical, because if people don't know what their rights are, if they don't know what their basic human rights are, they can't even fight or demand those rights. And so that's when they feel human right defenders or human right defense is an exclusive preserve of a particular field. No. You know, I often tell people that some of us can comfortably live outside the country and detach ourselves from Nigeria's issues. But as long as you're a Nigerian, you find that some of these things could come back to you.
Yes.
Right? So it's really to say that people need to understand their rights. And when we say people, not just, you know, people who have access to podcasts, but even that person on the street. Right? We need to see how we can work with religious organizations, because they also have a major role to play. We've said so much about legislation today, the parliament today, and the criminal justice actors, but we didn't talk about religious bodies, because there's another layer of violence that they also perpetrate based on, you know, what is being preached on the pulpit. But in that same vein, we can also use the pulpit to also spread this awareness around what women's rights are, around basic rights. And as much as we have people who use religious or holy books to perpetrate violence, when you look at those same religious books, you find that it also respects human rights, from the Quran to the Bible, whatever it is, right? So basically, I'm saying that we might be speaking a lot of big English here, calling constitutions and all of that, but you don't even need to go too far. That the basic thing that the average person on the street knows, his Quran, his religious, you can use it to help them to see that it is, thou shalt not kill. When you marry a woman, you know, that is underage, you're literally killing her. You know, that kind of thing. So it's important. For me, I wouldn't go outside of that importance of knowledge that Buki had talked about. We need to arm ourselves with knowledge. We need to arm ourselves. We need to understand that we can't get this right if we don't demand it. Now, like you mentioned, we're actually begging it, but we need to get back to the place of demanding it. And we can only demand it when we have knowledge. So please go for knowledge, right? When we're empowered with knowledge, when a large number of people are empowered with knowledge, at the end of the day, the government has no other choice than to coer. Right? But it's because we don't even know what we're asking for. We're begging them for things. That's when it looks as though we don't have power. So basically, my last point would be knowledge is power. Arm yourself with knowledge.
Yeah, knowledge is power. Arm yourself with knowledge. Quincy,
I've just been sitting down here. I've just been saying, wow. So these laws exist.
It's crazy.
Literally, I did not know.
Yeah.
And I'm so thankful that you people are here to make me understand and to know these laws. Talking about awareness, I never knew. I'm just knowing all these laws, and I'm like, wow. So there's a law
as
that
long as if you have a 5-year-old daughter,
when you're married,
she's an adult.
Okay. Like, I've just been speechless. And it's just,
and that's just one example, though. That's just one example.
And it's an eye opener for me because, first of all, why are we even selecting these leaders? We need to know our leaders. Because I need to know them.
That's
before I select you to come and make decisions for me and to bring up bills that will help me. Because why on earth will I choose someone that doesn't, that I know that cannot even represent?
Yes.
Oh, this is they are my life. This is my life. We are literally electing people who are going to kill us.
Let me also say something. when we talk about knowledge of rights and knowledge of these laws, let's not think it's only for adults. We must also take it to our children.
Children. Yes.
You see, those of us who are parents, whether you are parents biologically or you have children who look up to you as parents. Because by the time we start saying schools, don't forget that sex education, we're still fighting them to do sex education. Human rights, they believe that once you teach people human rights, then you are empowering them to be antagonists. Those of
Do you
us
know your right? Check your
who have
constitution.
access to children must actually teach them in the language that they understand, so that they know that they live in a sane society. That this society is not just governed by sentiment, that it is governed by written laws. Of course, let's not forget that there are, laws that are unwritten. That one is a big conversation on its own. Because those unwritten, uncodified laws, people are just using different things to say this is our culture, and then they just bring in different things. But the ones that have been codified, let's speak it. When we are simplifying laws, not just simplifying it, develop it in cartoons, develop it in illustrations, develop it when you are doing explainer video, to say it in a way that children will understand. The same way we do Bible 101, so that our children can understand. Because if they don't understand, if somebody touch their PP or their wee-wee, they will not know that the person is violating their right to bodily autonomy.
Just add, I just think in our education system, there should be a subject just for right. It should just be about the rights, our rights. It should just be about our rights as citizens and what we should do when it's been violated.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you, ladies. This is an interesting conversation that if we continue, we will not end today, but we have to draw the curtain here, sadly. But I actually appreciate the conversation so far, because we need to create a lot of awareness. And when we talk about women political representation, if we don't even understand that it's a human rights conversation, we will still think that we need to keep begging for it. And like Buki said, one of the principles is when you talk about participation. And so at the basis, we need to constantly push for better participation, like you said, quality representation, because at the end, those are the people that determine the laws, that determines the level of enforcement. Because if you don't have an active and independent legislative arm of government, they can't even oversight the executive to ensure enforcement of these laws and ensure implementation. So at the end, representation matters, and we keep pushing for better inclusion of women. This is where we draw the curtain, and I want to specially appreciate our guest. Thank you so much, Funke Adeoye.
Thank you.
Hope Behind Bars. You guys do amazing work. It's inspirational, honestly. And Buki Shonibare, thank you so much. Did I get the surname? I saw you. I tried. Thank you so much, and for being part of this conversation. And really, Invictus Africa, I admire your work and also what you do around data. Thank you so much. I'll leave it to Quinty. I appreciate our audience.
Thank you for listening to us and for watching us every time on YouTube and listening to our podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I want to shout out to our behind the scene members. Shout out to DJ Drexx, Hamilton Odems, Fredcoker. Shout out to Ifeanyi, Andrea, and Ayo. And I think that brings us to the end of this episode on the Unamplified Podcast.
Yes, don't forget to like, subscribe, drop a comment, follow us on all our social media platforms at the Unamplified Podcast on Instagram, TikTok, Threads, IG, Twitter or X, and even on LinkedIn and Facebook. We always end with a cheers to Africa. So Buki, you will just join us in veteran spirit. When you're on,
you're amplified.
Cheers
to Africa.
Yeah, thank you.